On a late autumn afternoon in 1986, as the last dry leaves fell in the bitter cold wind, the dark basement of the Bowen house became the keeper of a horrifying secret. In the flickering light of a few candles, sisters Tina and Karen, their faces pale with anticipation, trembled as they placed their mother's photograph in the center of a wavering ring of fire. Their hands clasped tightly together, ice-cold, as if clinging to the last bit of warmth before stepping into a world they were never meant to touch. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the howling wind slipping through cracks in the walls, like the wailing of a lost soul. They began to whisper, their voices shaking as they called their mother's name, a desperate plea sent to the unseen. "Mom, are you there?" The question repeated over and over, merging with the pounding of their hearts. The air thickened, growing so heavy it felt as though someone was standing behind them, exhaling a chilling breath onto their necks. And then, in a moment where time itself seemed to freeze, a knock came from the wall behind them, gentle, yet sharp as nails scraping against rotting wood. Tina gasped, eyes wide, while Karen gripped her sister's hand so tightly that her nails dug deep into her flesh. The knocking didn't stop. It grew steady, slow, thump, 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 like the heartbeat of something no longer alive. Each sound hammered into their minds, both beckoning and terrifying. "Mom, is that you?" Karen choked out, but the only response was an eerie silence laced with the relentless knocking. The sisters exchanged frantic glances, unaware that they had just opened a door they could never close. In the days that followed, the knocking became a living nightmare. It was no longer confined to the basement. Late at night, as darkness swallowed the house, the eerie sounds echoed from everywhere, the ceiling, beneath the floorboards, from the unseen corners where light never reached. The old TV in the living room flickered on at odd hours, its screen a storm of white noise, emitting a high-pitched static scream. Objects began to vanish in an On a bitterly cold December night, when Mr. Frank was away, the knocking returned, slow and steady, like the footsteps of death itself coming to collect. Tina gripped Karen's hand tightly, pressing her lips together to stop a scream from escaping. "We have to check," Tina whispered, her voice trembling but determined. Armed with a flashlight, they descended the stairs, each creaking step like a knife slicing through their fragile courage. The basement air was thick, damp, mixed with something metallic, something that smelled eerily like dried blood from the days before. When the dim light swept across the wall, they froze. A new message had appeared, scrawled in jagged, erratic strokes, "I see you." The words gleamed red, smeared and uneven, as if drawn with trembling fingers in a fit of madness. Karen screamed, dropping the flashlight. Its beam spun wildly across the ceiling, casting twisted shadows that stretched like clawed hands reaching for them. They ran, scrambling up the stairs, hearts pounding like drums of war inside their chests. The front door flung open, and they bolted to the neighbor's house, gasping, sobbing, begging for help. When Mr. Frank received their frantic call, he returned home, frustrated but skeptical. He was convinced this was just another hysterical episode from his daughters, whose nerves had been frayed thin by fear. But this time, he couldn't deny the change in the air. The house felt heavier, colder, as if something had just left, leaving behind only the echo of its wicked presence. He moved upstairs cautiously, each step echoing in the silence, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Reaching the bedroom, he stood before the closet, inhaling deeply as if sensing that something unspeakable was waiting behind the doors. Then, he pulled them open. A figure loomed inside. Tall. Motionless. Fear. It showed something far worse. Because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much, much darker. Daniel Lapland walked out of the juvenile detention center after nearly 10 months, but his eyes held no remorse, only an abyss of darkness, like a void that swallowed all light. He did not return to redeem himself. He returned to continue the hunt, to spread the terror that the Bowen house was only the prelude to. The small town in Massachusetts was no longer peaceful. It had become the chessboard of a monster in human form, and his next pieces would pay in blood. Just months after his release, the darkness rose again. On October 14, 1987, two Ruger .22 pistols disappeared from a house less than 400 meters from where Daniel was staying, along with a large sum of cash. No one saw him. He was a phantom, slipping through locked doors, leaving the stench of death in the air. Then, a month later, the Gustafson family became his next prey. When William and Priscilla were out, Daniel broke in, rummaging like a starving beast. But this time, he wasn't just there to steal, he was there to destroy. On that fateful day, Priscilla entered the house with her 5-year-old son, unaware that death was waiting behind the door. Daniel stood there, eyes gleaming in the shadows, a gun trembling in his hand from excitement. He growled, forcing the mother and child upstairs, each of Priscilla's steps heavy as if walking on a collapsing floor. He tied her to the bed, the rope digging so tightly into her skin that it drew blood, then locked the little boy in the closet. His muffled sobs filled the cold room like a twisted symphony of horror. Daniel looked at Priscilla, a crooked smile curling on his face, and then he raped her, a brutal, monstrous act, like a beast tearing apart its prey. He stood before the court, his eyes empty, devoid of emotion, as he was sentenced to life in prison. Years later, in 2017, he lowered his head at a parole hearing, mumbling an apology, "I'm truly sorry for the harm I've caused." But the Gustafson family did not forgive. They looked at him like a rabid dog, a creature that needed to be put down. "He must stay in prison for life," they shouted, voices trembling with hatred. Inside the cold prison walls, Daniel may still be breathing, but the blood he left behind on the walls of the Bowen house, on the Gustafson family's bed, would never fade. Like a curse. A haunting that would last forever.